Angie Williams couldn't help but notice her smooth-talking co-worker, Willie Williams, and she soon vowed to love him forever.
He made me happy. He made me feel good, you know. He made me feel secure.
But Angie's dream of a perfect marriage was no match for Willie's wandering eyes.
I see the late-night phone calls. I just knew something wasn't right.
Before Angie could get to the bottom of Willie's lies, a shocking scandal would rock her world.
I think that's one of the worst things you can ever do to a person.
And expose everything that Willie had tried so hard to hide.
I was like, oh my God, is this really happening? I felt like I was in a nightmare.
When it comes to love and marriage, things aren't always as they seem. Angie Williams always thought her best was good enough, until her first marriage started to crumble.
We started having a lot of fussing, arguments. I was like, okay, well, we need to maybe give each other some space.
But distance doesn't always make the heart grow fonder. And in the spring of 1994, Angie's marriage ended for good. As the weeks went by, Angie focused her attention on raising her daughter and keeping her nursing career moving forward. Until one day that fall, when a smooth-talking co-worker sashayed her way. His name was Hallenton Willie Williams.
He was a bubbly type of person, very charming and, you know, was a hard-working type of person, but I didn't think he was going to be faithful.
Willie had quite the reputation of being a ladies' man at their Orlando healthcare center. But just as Angie was ready to write him off, a friend assured her that Willie's intentions were true.
She was telling me that he cared about me. He really, you know, liked me and want to build a future with me. But getting into the dating scene again, that was kind of scary. But, you know, he made me feel comfortable, so I decided to go for it.
Angie agreed to go out with Willie, and one date quickly led to another. Willie told Angie that he was tired of dating jealous women, and her laid-back personality was exactly what he hoped he would find. As the weeks went by, Angie spent more time with her new boyfriend and was pleased to learn how much she and Willie had in common.
We had cookouts, we did the family thing, and he made me happy. He made me feel good. He made me feel secure.
Willie took her a lot of places, and I think as adventurous as my mom is, she liked the spontaneous things.
In March of 1996, 2 years after they began dating, Willie proved his love for Angie by proposing to her in front of their entire church congregation.
I was like, okay, he might be the one. He's doing it in front of God and everyone. So I said, yes, I marry you, like that. And everybody was applauding.
The engaged couple moved in together, and a year later, in June of 1997, Angie announced that she was pregnant.
I was like, yeah, I'm gonna have another little cousin. I was happy because, you know, she was my favorite aunt, so anything that made my aunt happy made me happy.
Glowing with the thought of their new family, Angie and Willie tied the knot that fall in a small ceremony at their local church.
The wedding was nice. Had a reception afterwards, and I was very happy, excited.
I remember a lot of flowers, a lot of dancing, a lot of smiles. You know, you can't help but to be excited for the person. So it was a good day to remember.
As the newlyweds returned to normal life, Angie couldn't help but stop and count her many blessings.
My life was going well. I was happy. Was a new bride, a baby on the way, a new house, new husband. Everything was going great.
But not everything was as it seemed. And just 4 years later, Angie Williams would realize that she had been living a total lie. By the fall of 2001, Angie's health had taken a downward turn. She was hospitalized with pneumonia.
I was sick and weak and just feeling depressed at that point.
Over the years, life with Willie hadn't been easy. But despite everything Angie had been through, nothing would prepare her for the news she received while laid up in her hospital bed. It started with a disturbing phone call from the police.
When the police called, I think at first I thought they had the wrong number. Hearing what I was hearing, I felt like I'd been hit with a brick.
Angie was in disbelief as officers gave her news so traumatizing, she knew nothing would ever be the same again.
It was so embarrassing, it was so devastating. I can see where some people can contemplate committing suicide.
This was definitely the worst for my mother.
In August of 1997, 4 years before the police would deliver a traumatic blow, Angie Williams couldn't have been more proud of her hardworking husband, Willie.
Willie was a very hard worker. He was very likable on the job, and he took his job very seriously.
Almost everyone thought Willie was a caring and respectful nurse's assistant at the medical facility where he'd worked for years. But the couple's happiness was soon tempered by tragedy. In November of 1997, while 20 weeks pregnant, Angie developed complications with the baby. She was devastated when her pregnancy ended in a miscarriage.
I felt a big loss, empty, it was very hard.
When my mom lost the baby, I think that was like the darkest times with me and her, with our relationship, with her and Willie's relationship, just all of us all together.
As the weeks went by, Angie slowly recovered from the miscarriage. She needed her husband more than ever, but Willie was spending more time at work than at home.
You kind of feel like it was tension, he started working more, and sometimes I felt alone, because he was spending a lot of time away.
In 1998, when Angie learned she was pregnant again, she hoped it would breathe life back into the marriage. But sadly, just 6 months later, Angie's second pregnancy resulted in another miscarriage.
She didn't even have anything left in her from the first miscarriage, so it was very bad. It was the worst.
To make matters worse, just when Angie needed Willie the most, he seemed to be busy elsewhere.
I was on my way to the store, and I saw Willie and one of the young ladies that he worked with. And, I did recognize the young lady. He was dating her before me. They was just walking and talking and laughing. So I approached them, and I was like, what's going on?
Always the gentleman, Willie explained that he had given the co-worker a ride to the mall so that she wouldn't have to walk alone.
It did make sense because they worked at the same place, but that was kind of strange for me.
Even though Angie was suspicious, she was inclined to give Willie the benefit of the doubt. But her family wasn't as forgiving.
It was just really something that I just could not pinpoint about Willie that I didn't like, but I knew my mother had to be happy. But it's just something I didn't like.
A few months later, Angie would realize her daughter was onto something. In March of 1999, Willie went off to work as usual, but he left his bag at home by mistake.
He took that bag everywhere he went to work from one place to another. He kept the bag with him at all times.
Curious, Angie decided to take a peek inside.
So I looked in the bag and I seen a roll of condoms. It was approximately 10 to 12 condoms. Nothing else was in there at that time. Like he had got rid of everything, but he forgot the condoms.
Angie was furious, and later that evening, when Willie walked through the door, she demanded an explanation. But Willie refused to admit anything.
His defense was, you shouldn't be looking in my bag and you shouldn't be messing with my stuff. And he walked away, shut the door, and that was that. I was thinking he was probably seeing somebody at this point, but at the same time, being in love with him, I didn't want my mind to take me there.
Angie didn't feel like fighting, so she let the matter go. But several months later, her concerns about Willie's faithfulness would surface once again.
We were sitting down for dinner, and the phone kept ringing about 4 times. Willie never picked the phone up. And then finally, I said to him, "You need to pick the phone up and see what's going on."
When the phone rang again, Willie answered, but by this time, the caller was irate.
Willie was like shouting, "Stop calling my phone. Why are you calling my phone?" And then he was like, "Oh, this crazy lady. She been stalking me, and she just keep calling. I'm gonna get a restraining order on her." So then he left abruptly. Then I'm thinking, okay, he's going to do that, so everything will be taken care of.
With dinner ruined and Willie on his way to the police station, Angie began to clean up. When suddenly, there was a knock at the door.
It was the lady, and apparently it was the woman who kept calling. And she started tearing up my decorations on the door, banging on the door, with a fist.
She was telling my aunt to come outside, and I was like, "Don't go out there, you don't know what she's capable of." And then she started trying to come in the house.
Angie wasn't sure if Willie was on his way home, and she had no idea if the stranger had a weapon, so she decided to call the police.
It was dark, and I didn't want to go out there.
She was kicking and banging on the windows, saying, "Willie, come out. I know you in there." It was crazy.
Who was this woman, and why was she so desperate to find Willie?
She was just saying a lot of stuff like, "Willie's my husband."
It was crazy to me. I felt like I was in a nightmare.
December of 1999 was anything but joyous for Angie Williams and Willie, her husband of 2 years. One night that month, a strange woman appeared on her doorstep, demanding to talk to Willie. But Willie wasn't home.
She started tearing up the door, but I wouldn't go out the door because it was starting to be dark.
She was just saying a lot of stuff like, "Willie's my husband." And my mom was just like, "Who are you? Leave my home. And he's not here." It was bad.
Frightened, Angie called 911. And when the police showed up, they promptly arrested the irate woman and charged her with domestic battery.
Willie had showed up around the time police showed up.
Willie claimed the woman was an ex-girlfriend who just couldn't let him go. But Angie wasn't convinced she was getting the whole story.
My mom tried to be strong for us. She played it cool. But I know it hurt her.
Still, Angie was determined to give this marriage her all. And over the next month, Willie seemed to put more effort into their relationship. Then in February of 2000, he asked her for an extraordinary favor.
Willie came to me and said, "This patient, the facility is about to put her out in the streets, and could she come here and live?"
The patient was a 36-year-old woman who required total care at Willie's nursing facility. Although Angie was a nurse herself, she had strong reservations about Willie's request.
She wasn't able to walk, She was very disabled.
Angie thought Willie was just trying to do a good deed, but she knew the liability alone was too risky.
I said, no. I was like, she can't live here as something happened to her. I don't want to be responsible. And he never brought it up again.
Despite all that had gone wrong, as the year rolled along, it seemed like life was finally settling down for the Williams family. But in November of 2001, Angie's health took a sudden downward turn. Doctors diagnosed her with diabetes, and when Angie also came down with a case of pneumonia, she was immediately hospitalized. Things seemed to be at an all-time low, but they were about to get even worse.
While I was in the hospital, I got a call from the police. I think at first I thought they had the wrong number.
But as the officer on the line kept talking, Angie's confusion turned to horror. The officer explained that a patient at Willie's facility, who was both physically and mentally disabled, had been the victim of a rape. The assault happened in 2000, and the patient had since delivered a baby boy. Her obesity had hidden her pregnancy from hospital staff. Investigators now focused on Willie as their prime suspect. Angie's husband was in jail, awaiting the results of a paternity test.
It's hard to describe type of feeling, like, things was just happening so fast. It's like my brain just wouldn't accept it.
When my mom told me why Willie was arrested, I just thought that was just the most degrading thing you can ever do to a human being.
I had to take myself home, but I wasn't supposed to, I told the nurse something so that they would let me go home.
Against her doctor's advice, Angie checked out of the hospital. Tucked away in the safety of her own home, Angie Williams had no idea who to believe or what to expect next.
It was just like a death. It was just like a death to me.
You might was married to this guy, but you had no clue.
I haven't ever seen my mom that low in life, ever.
If you have a story of marriage gone wrong and would like to appear on this series, go to investigation.discovery.com. In November of 2001, Angie Williams was reeling from devastating news. Her husband Willie was suspected of raping a physically and mentally disabled woman at the medical center where he worked, and possibly fathering her child.
It was so embarrassing, it was so devastating, It was hard, very hard.
Willie was now out on bail. He had consented to a paternity test, and everyone anxiously awaited the results. Meanwhile, Angie had no idea where Willie was living. She hadn't spoken to him since her hospital stay.
I had to go to work every day. I had a child to feed, but it's like I was outside my body. It felt like a death to me.
She felt like it was her fault, but it's not her fault. You can't blame yourself for someone else's mistake. You might was married to this guy, but you had no clue, so you can't blame yourself.
Angie was distraught. And just when it seemed that things couldn't get any worse, she learned that the patient was the same woman that Willie had asked to bring home and care for the previous year. When the DNA results came back from the lab, the truth was even more painful than Angie ever imagined. Willie was indeed the father of his patient's baby. He was immediately arrested and charged with sexual battery on a mentally defective person.
I was devastated. I was hurt, and I can see where some people can contemplate committing suicide because I felt like that for a little split second, So I started doing a lot of praying.
This was definitely worse, the worst for my mother, feeling the way she felt, because she definitely had Willie so high on the pedestal that he was in the galaxy, literally, and he could do no wrong in her eyes.
In his sick mind, he probably knew that that girl was pregnant and was probably trying to have her come have the baby there and somehow or another pass along as ours, because, I had the 2 miscarriages.
With all his lies and deceit, Angie wondered if Willie had ever been faithful to her during their 4-year marriage.
I don't think he never been faithful to me. He would tell me just enough to make himself look good and make somebody else look bad.
Angie was ready to move on and wanted nothing more to do with Willie. She knew that getting called to testify in his trial was a very real possibility. And Angie was terrified at the thought of having to relive her nightmare in court. But that day would never come. In July of 2003, Willie took a plea deal and was convicted of sexual battery on a mentally defective person and lewd and lascivious molestation. he was sentenced to 13 years in prison.
I would just say, this man is sick, you know. That's what I was thinking, this man is sick.
Today, the unending heartbreak Angie felt because of Willie is a thing of the past.
It took about almost a year before I was feeling better, you know. It was tough, but you gotta have some kind of support system behind you, you know. It's difficult to talk about it, but he's piece history for me.
I feel like it's only so much a person can handle. And she handled it all, and she handled it well. She's the strongest woman I ever met to this day, and I love her.
Angie still works as a nursing assistant. Her health is remarkably improved, right along with her love life.
I got a new man in my life, and I am now engaged. And I've been working, you know, being more confident, more aware of what's going on, you know. I am in control of my life.
Fry was just a single mom trying to make ends meet when she was swept off her feet by the handsome and charming Scott Peterson.
He was funny and smart and good looking. Definitely there was chemistry.
She fell in love. It was the real deal.
But when Amber discovered her new love was at the heart of a huge criminal investigation,
he was not the person that everybody thought that he was.
It was about adultery, and it was about murder.
Amber would find herself a star witness in one of the most highly publicized and horrific criminal cases the nation had ever seen.
I was just in shock. I just was shaking and crying.
When it comes to love and marriage, things aren't always as they seem. As a single mom, 27-year-old Amber Fry knew exactly what she wanted in a man.
I was doing massage therapy, and my daughter was not quite 2. I was looking for somebody that wanted a commitment, just somebody to spend my life with.
So, in the winter of 2002, when a friend said she'd found the perfect guy, Amber was hopeful. 30-year-old Scott Peterson was handsome and charming. And best of all, he was single, or so he claimed.
She thought that maybe there would be a connection or a good fit. He was looking for someone to spend his life with.
That November, Amber agreed to meet Scott in front of a local bar in Fresno, California. When Scott walked up, Amber could hardly believe her eyes.
I was pleasantly surprised. I thought he was handsome and nice smile and polite.
From there, the two went out to dinner and found their conversation flowed as freely as their drinks.
I shared that I was a massage therapist. I shared about my daughter, and he was interested in hearing about her. I felt that there was a mutual interest in one another. Definitely, there was chemistry.
Scott told Amber he was a fertilizer salesman who traveled for work and lived alone in a big 1940s house in Sacramento, about 3 hours away.
I said, well, Thanksgiving's around the corner. Do you have any plans? And he had said he was going to go fishing with his uncle and his dad in Alaska. Christmas, he had plans with his family. He also had a business trip planned. He was going to Europe. He sounded like he had very busy holidays coming up.
The date went well, and the next morning, Scott told Amber he would be leaving for Alaska soon, but he promised to call.
I would say almost daily we talked. Every time, it was always something to look forward to.
Scott was just everything. He looked good, physically fit, polished, said all the right things, did all the right things. He was perfect.
A couple weeks later, Scott invited Amber and her daughter on a picnic and hike.
I was excited he's going to meet her. He held her hand, and she held my hand. He was very sweet with her.
That was big in her mind. She just was very excited and very happy that he was taking an interest in her daughter.
The next evening, Amber invited Scott over to help her decorate for the holiday season.
We were just having casual conversation, and Scott had told me he'd never been married, and I asked if he had children. He said no. I definitely was feeling closer to him and feeling that there could be something more.
So when Scott showed up at Amber's house a week later in tears, saying he had a confession to make, Amber's heart sank.
He was not the Scott that I've seen. He was very emotional and upset and said that he had lied to me about something.
Through tears, Scott admitted to Amber that he had been married before.
He had said that he had lost his wife and that this would be the first holidays without her. He was very upset. It definitely took me by surprise.
Scott seemed so distraught that Amber decided not to press him any further.
I didn't know what had happened, if maybe she had died in a car accident or if she had cancer. I had told him, well, I couldn't imagine, I understand why it'd be difficult.
Amber couldn't help but wonder if Scott was ready for another relationship so soon.
And he reassured that he did. I still wanted to continue our relationship and seeing where things would go.
So Amber carried on with the relationship. She was sure she was falling hard for Scott. But before the year was over, Amber's hopes for a perfect partner would be destroyed in a most unimaginable way. On the night of December 29th, 2002, Amber was visiting some friends over the holidays.
It was a couple days before New Year's, and I was over at my friend's celebrating their daughter's birthday, and I got a call from my friend.
Her friend was a Fresno police officer, and he had urgent news for Amber. It seemed that her new boyfriend, Scott Peterson, was hiding a horrible secret, and what her friend told her next was nearly impossible to believe.
This was a man who was leading a double life.
I couldn't talk. I was completely distraught.
In December of 2002, nearly a month before a terrifying phone call came in, Amber Fry's new boyfriend, Scott Peterson, had just confessed that he had been married before and had recently lost his wife.
I didn't ask any details about his loss. I understood, that it would be something difficult and I wouldn't know how to handle that.
Amber forgave Scott for not telling her sooner and tried to move forward by inviting him to her Christmas party. When Scott arrived for the occasion, he brought Amber something special.
He showed up with a dozen roses, and he said all he could think about was me. And then he went back outside and came back in with 2 more dozen roses for me. They were very beautiful. So it definitely put a smile to my face.
But after the night ended in intimacy, Amber had an interesting conversation with Scott about children.
He had said that if things developed, that my daughter would be enough. He had mentioned something about getting a vasectomy. It definitely didn't settle well to think that he would have a vasectomy and not ever want any more children. I definitely was open to having more children.
But Scott told Amber he was willing to discuss the matter further before making a final decision. Amber was relieved.
Things still felt really good where things were going.
He wanted to accept her daughter as his, a family situation. Just a complete package is what he was offering.
Amber knew that in the weeks coming up, she wouldn't see much of Scott. So in an effort to stay in touch, she asked him for his address overseas.
He said his family and him were going to spend the holidays in Maine, and then from there he was going to travel to Europe. I had asked him if I wanted to send you something while you're away, how do I go about doing that? And he had said, I have a P.O. box number, but it was being sent to Modesto. And I had asked him, I don't understand, how is it if I send it to Modesto, is it going to get to you in Europe?
Scott explained that he planned to use a courier service to deliver his packages. But Amber had her doubts.
It didn't make sense to me. I remember I got very teary-eyed about it. I was feeling very sensitive at that point.
Before long, Amber began to notice a few more things about her interactions with Scott that seemed a little off.
Several times when I talked to him, he was like out in the jacuzzi, outside in the water, or he was getting ready to take a shower. And those things weren't really settling well after it was multiple times.
And when Scott called Amber on Christmas night, she heard a female voice in the background calling his name.
And he said, oh, that's my mother. I was questioning whether that was his mother or maybe it was somebody else, and I definitely had doubts.
There was about a 1-week period of time. It all changed. There wasn't bubbly, happy Amber. Amber was distant from everybody.
Figuring it wouldn't hurt to run a quick background check on Scott, Amber asked a friend of hers for help.
Things weren't making sense to me. I wanted to find out more, but wasn't sure how to go about it. And so I contacted one of my friends that worked at the police department.
It was a move that would change Amber's life forever.
I was afraid to go home. I wasn't sure what I might walk into.
She was devastated with what Scott truly was.
In late December of 2002, Amber Fry suddenly had a few doubts about the man who had stolen her heart. When she asked a friend at the Fresno Police Department to look into Scott Peterson, she wasn't sure what he would find.
I shared the different things with my friend about what I was questioning, and he thought, yeah, it sounds a little shady. He goes, I'll make some calls.
On the night of December 29th, Amber was catching up with her girlfriends when her friend called back with disturbing news.
He came across an article and said, I'm not sure what to make out of it yet, but I'm gonna go ahead and bring it to you. The article was in reference to a missing pregnant woman in Modesto, and the details of her husband. His name was Scott Peterson, and what really stood out for me was just the description that he's a fertilizer salesman. Can't say that it looked good.
Although it was almost 2 a.m., Amber immediately called the Modesto police to see if it was the same Scott Peterson.
I gave them my information, so I was on hold. Seconds seemed endless. And then she got back to me and said, yes. I said, yes. It is the same person? She said, yes. At that point, I think I was just in shock. I just was shaking and crying.
Later that morning, detectives interviewed Amber and told her what they knew about her boyfriend. According to police, Scott was still very much married to a 27-year-old woman named Lacey, who was 8 months pregnant with their unborn child. Worst of all, Lacey had been missing since Christmas Eve, and detectives now suspected that Scott was involved.
We did learn from Scott that he came home from fishing on Christmas Eve. His wife Lacey was not there. Everybody was just going crazy. Scott was the only one who was calm. He seemed like just the perfect guy until Amber came along. 10 days before Lacey went missing, Scott told Amber that it was going to be the first holiday without his wife. That was either an incredible coincidence or a premonition that defies logic.
With Lacey still missing, detectives hoped that Amber would assist in their investigation.
We asked her if she'd be willing to let us put a recording device on her cell phone so that any contacts that she had with Scott would be recorded.
The big picture was that there was a missing pregnant woman. I was open with the police to do whatever was necessary in helping find her.
Amber did make comment that she was going to work with the police. We were totally scared for her. If he could make his wife disappear, what could he do to Amber?
Immediately, Amber began recording every conversation she had with Scott, carefully walking the line between girlfriend and informant.
We talked quite a bit, like nothing had changed. It was nerve-wracking. I was definitely very nervous.
On December 31st, Scott called Amber and claimed he was in Paris at a large New Year's Eve party.
I'm near the Eiffel Tower. New Year's celebration is unreal. The crowd is huge.
When he was talking to me about Paris and New Year's, he was in fact in Modesto at a candlelight visual with hundreds of people looking for Lacey. It's just so unreal.
He would call at different times, and she would just have to react. She had an enormous amount of courage.
Suddenly, on January 6, 2003, to everyone's surprise, Scott came clean to Amber. He confessed that he had a pregnant wife who vanished from their house while he went out fishing. And he told Amber he hadn't gone to Europe. He was out searching for Lacey instead.
I definitely was crying and angry that this was happening. Just the lies that he had told me, my response has always been, I find very little innocence in your behavior.
I deserve to understand why you told me you'd lost your wife and this was the first holidays you'd spend without her. Now all of a sudden your wife's missing? Are you kidding me?
If you think I had something to do with her disappearance, that's so wrong.
A tearful Scott still hoped for a future with Amber, but it was far too late. Amber knew the truth about Scott, and on January 24th, 2003, the rest of the country did too. That day, Amber gave a press conference that shocked the nation.
Okay, first of all, I met Scott Peterson November 20th, 2002. Scott told me he was not married. We did have a romantic relationship.
She looked very frightened. She looked anxious. She looked stressed.
I couldn't catch my breath, and I kept saying, I can't breathe. I'm hyperventilating, I can't breathe.
Now that Scott knew Amber was working with investigators, police were concerned about what he might do.
There was always a caution that we felt that Amber could be in danger. Scott was under surveillance all the time.
Incredibly, over the next month, Scott continued to call, and Amber recorded their conversations.
Scott actually was commending me for my bravery and that he was sorry that I had to go through this.
Investigators hoped Scott would say something that would lead them to Lacey. But as the evidence mounted against him, Scott seemed more cautious with his words.
I didn't feel like it really was going anywhere, or I would get a straight answer.
But 2 months later, when a storm hit the San Francisco Bay Area, Amber and the nation would finally have the answers they needed.
Amber just flipped.
It was almost like an act of God for us.
If you have a story of marriage gone wrong and would like to appear on this series, go to investigation.discovery.com. On April 13th, 2003, 2 months after Amber Frey stopped recording her phone calls with Scott Peterson, a couple walking their dog near the San Francisco Bay made a gruesome discovery.
2 bodies had been discovered in San Francisco Bay. An unborn child, and then the next day, an adult female. The bodies came to shore, we believe, in response to a storm.
The bodies were found near the area where Scott had claimed to be fishing the night of Lacey's disappearance. Investigators felt confident that they were Lacey and her unborn child, but they needed DNA results to be sure.
Finding both bodies washed ashore pretty much cinched it for me that Scott was probably involved in this.
I was at work, and I got a call that they may possibly have found Lacey's body. I remember I was very tearful that day.
Medical examiners could not determine a cause of death, but investigators had their theories.
There was an absence of evidence of a violent struggle in that house, but there's any number of ways that he could have killed her. There were remnants of concrete anchors. We never found the anchors. We can only speculate that they were used to weight down the body.
As investigators waited for the DNA results, they continued to follow Scott.
He goes pretty quick on the freeway, and as we continued to follow him, we started to get worried that some of the people that we were working with was going to get hurt trying to keep up with him. So the decision was made that we were going to place him into custody.
On April 18th, police arrested Scott in San Diego, eventually charging him with 2 counts of murder. A few hours later, DNA results confirmed that the bodies were Lacey and her unborn son.
Scott's reaction didn't really surprise me because the guy is always in control. He showed very little emotion.
During a search of Scott's vehicle, police were surprised by what they found.
There was over $14,000 in cash. He had 4 cell phones in there. He had his brother's driver's license with him. He had like a fillet knife and camping stuff.
Law enforcement found a map to Amber's workplace and ropes and other items that could have been used to kill her. And so our worst nightmare came true in the sense that we had always believed that there was a risk of harm to Amber.
Even Scott's appearance had changed. No one knows for sure what Scott was planning, but police suspected he was on his way out of town.
It's possible that he was thinking of fleeing the United States and going to Mexico. I mean, nothing really would have surprised me at that point.
On November 18th, 2003, Scott was ordered to stand trial for the murders of his wife and unborn child. He pleaded not guilty.
That's correct, Your Honor. I'm innocent.
Amber became the prosecution's star witness.
I was definitely nervous. one of the first things they asked me to do is to point at Scott Peterson. It was kind of like I don't know that person sitting there. And that's how I felt in my heart.
As Amber continued her testimony, the prosecution played the taped phone conversations.
Scott Peterson was a liar. And I think that those conversations were, for many on the jury, a turning point.
On November 12, 2004, 2 years after Amber first met Scott Peterson, he was found guilty of both murders.
I was relieved that I felt there's justice in the court system. It was definitely a very emotional day for me.
Prosecutors believed Scott wanted to be a bachelor, not a father. And then he met Amber.
I think he did not want to lose that relationship with Amber. I think he was living his fantasy life. He wanted to be Don Juan. He wanted to be Mr. Romance.
I don't feel like I was any different than Lacey, being swept off her feet, and this possibly being the man of my dreams. He will always be a wolf in sheep's clothing.
On March 16, 2005, Scott Peterson was sentenced to death by lethal injection. Today, Amber is now the single mother of 2 beautiful children.
My daughter is now 10 and my son's 7. They keep me very busy. Being a single mom, that definitely comes first in my life.
Amber knows her name will always be attached to Scott Peterson's, which has made forming new relationships a struggle.
I don't think she's really quite capable of having a complete relationship with anybody right now. I don't think it gets much worse than what Scott Peterson did to her. That was the love of her life.
Amber is still a massage therapist and spends her days being active and healthy, focusing on her faith and family.
I've been going to a place that has cardio kickboxing, and so I do that on a regular basis. This year is probably the first time in many that I feel more myself.
The night begins with a sound no one can later agree on. Some say it was a door slamming. Others remember glass shattering sharp and sudden, like a gunshot swallowed by distance. What everyone agrees on is the silence that followed, the kind of silence that doesn't belong in a small Texas town after midnight, the kind that presses against windows and makes dogs stop barking, the kind that feels like something has already gone wrong and the world just hasn't caught up yet. By morning, the word spreads fast. Faster than the sun climbing over the flat horizon. Faster than the patrol cars rolling in from neighboring counties. A woman is missing. Her car is still there. Her house is still there. Her life, abruptly, is not. This is Texas, 2003. A town built on routine. Early coffee. Late football games. Familiar faces at the gas station. The kind of place where nothing ever really happens, and when it does, it happens to someone else, somewhere far away, on the evening news. Until it doesn't. Until it happens here. Her name is already on everyone's lips by noon. Said quietly at first, then louder, then with a strange caution, as if speaking it too boldly might make things worse. She is in her early 30s. Works steady hours. Known for showing up on time. Known for calling her mother every Sunday night. Known, above all, for not disappearing. Her front door is unlocked. That detail hits the detectives immediately. In this town, you lock your doors. Always. Even in daylight. Especially at night. An unlocked door is not forgetfulness. It's either trust or interruption. Inside, nothing looks disturbed enough to scream violence, but nothing looks right either. A chair slightly out of place. A coffee mug on the counter, cold, untouched. Her purse sits by the door. Her keys are there too. Her phone is not. The air feels staged, like a scene paused mid-breath. Outside, her car is parked exactly where she left it. No broken windows. No forced entry. No sign of a struggle in the driveway. The tires are cool. She didn't leave in a hurry. Or if she didn't leave in her own vehicle. The first officers on scene use words like concerning and unusual. By the afternoon, those words have shifted. Now it's suspicious. Now it's potential foul play. By nightfall, the phrase that nobody wants to say out loud settles into the room like smoke. Cold case doesn't exist yet. Not officially. Not on day one. But the conditions are already there. No witnesses. No clear timeline. No obvious enemy. Just absence. And absence is the hardest thing to investigate. Neighbors are interviewed. Everyone saw something. Everyone saw nothing. A truck driving too slowly. A figure near the streetlight. A sound around midnight that could have been anything. Memories blur as soon as they're spoken, reshaped by fear, by hindsight, by the need to be helpful. Each statement adds noise. None add clarity. Detectives trace her last known movements hour by hour. Work. Grocery store. Home. Normal. Almost aggressively normal. Receipts confirm it. Security cameras catch fragments of her face under fluorescent lights. She looks tired. She looks unaware. She looks like someone who believes she will wake up the next morning. Phone records offer the first crack in the routine. A call that doesn't fit. Late. Short. Incoming. The number is unfamiliar. Unregistered. A prepaid phone. Burners weren't rare in 2003, but they weren't invisible either. This one leaves almost nothing behind. No name. No address. Just a digital ghost that rang once and vanished. The community reacts the only way it knows how. With vigils. With flyers. With prayers taped to stop signs and grocery store windows. Her face is everywhere now, smiling from laminated paper, eyes following people as they shop, as they drive, as they try not to imagine the worst. Local news picks it up. Then regional. Then national, briefly, before something louder steals the spotlight. But for this town, time has stopped. Every unfamiliar car is suspect. Every stranger at the diner is watched. Parents walk their children to school. Doors are locked earlier. Lights stay on longer. Investigators expand the search radius. Fields. Ditches. Back roads that stretch for miles with no witnesses and no cameras. Texas offers space. Too much space. A body could be anywhere. Or nowhere at all. Days pass. Then weeks. Hope thins but doesn't disappear. Not yet. Tips pour in. Hundreds of them. Most go nowhere. Some contradict each other. A few feel promising until they collapse under scrutiny. One man claims he saw her arguing with someone near her house. Another insists she left town willingly. A woman swears she saw her at a bus station 2 counties over. None of it holds. Then there's the name that surfaces quietly, then louder. A man known to police. Not close to her, but not a stranger either. Someone who once worked nearby. Someone with a temper. Someone with a record that raises eyebrows but doesn't quite cross the line into certainty. Detectives look hard. They find inconsistencies. They find opportunity. They do not find proof. Without a body, without physical evidence, everything is circumstantial. And circumstantial evidence is a fragile thing. It bends. It breaks. It doesn't hold up well in court, and everyone in that room knows it. The case slows. Resources thin out. Files stack up. New crimes take priority. Leads dry. The phrase pending further information begins to appear in reports. The investigation is still open, technically, but the energy is gone. The urgency has cooled. The case is slipping, inch by inch, toward a colder place. Years pass. The flyers fade. New families move in. Children grow up hearing the story secondhand, a cautionary tale told without details, without names sometimes, just a reminder that something bad once happened here and was never fixed. Her family doesn't move on. They can't. Birthdays pass without answers. Holidays arrive with an empty chair. Her room stays the same longer than it should. They call detectives. They send letters. They ask the same questions and get the same careful responses. No updates. No breakthroughs. No closure. By the time a decade has passed, the file is thick and quiet. Evidence bags sit untouched. Cassette tapes of interviews degrade slowly in storage. Technology moves forward without it. DNA testing advances. Cell phone analysis becomes sharper. Surveillance becomes everywhere. The case stays frozen in 2003, trapped by the limits of its time. Then, almost 20 years later, something changes. Not loudly. Not with sirens or press conferences. Quietly. A review. A routine audit of old cases. A younger investigator, new to the department, reading old reports with fresh eyes. Someone not there when the assumptions were made. Someone not invested in the conclusions that went nowhere. They notice what others skimmed past. The phone call. The timing. A gap in the timeline that was never fully explained. A statement that doesn't quite match another, not dramatically, just enough to itch. They rerun numbers through modern databases. They cross-reference names that once meant nothing. They test evidence again, material that couldn't speak clearly in 2003 but might whisper now. And a name surfaces. Familiar. Uncomfortable. The same one that hovered on the edges of the case all those years ago. The man everyone suspected but couldn't touch. The man who aged, who built a life, who thought the past had finally gone quiet. This time, the connection is sharper. Still not a confession. Still not a body. But something closer. Something that didn't exist before. Enough to reopen the file. Enough to say the words out loud at last. Texas 2003 cold case reopened. The town hears it like an echo. Old fear rushing back, mixed with something else now. Anticipation. Dread. The idea that the answer might have been nearby all along. That the killer might have lived among them, waved back, stood in line at the same stores, breathing the same air. But reopening a case is not the same as solving it. Identifying a killer is not the same as proving one. And as detectives step back into a crime scene that exists now only in memory and paper, they realize the most dangerous thing about the past is not that it's gone. It's that it's still waiting. The file comes back to life with a sound no one hears but everyone feels, the quiet scrape of cardboard as boxes are pulled from storage, the dull thud of a case file hitting a metal desk, dust lifting into fluorescent light like a reminder of how long this story has been waiting. The year stamped on the cover still reads 2003, written in black marker by a hand that assumed, at the time, this investigation would end quickly, cleanly, with answers. It didn't. It stalled. It aged. It slept. And now it's awake again. The investigator reading it is younger than the case itself. No memory of the original panic, no emotional residue from the first search parties, no faces burned into their mind from candlelight vigils. That distance matters. Distance sharpens focus. Every line is read slowly. Every assumption is questioned. Why was this lead dismissed? Why did this interview stop here? Why did no one push further when the timeline bent just slightly out of shape? The first thing they rebuild is the night itself, minute by minute, not as it was remembered, but as it could have happened. The last confirmed sighting. The grocery store receipt. The timestamp on the security camera that caught her silhouette under buzzing lights. The phone call again, always the phone call, hovering over the timeline like a bruise that never faded. Incoming. Late. Short. The kind of call that doesn't say much but changes everything. In 2003, tracing it led nowhere useful. Now, 2 decades later, the digital landscape has changed. Old towers are mapped more precisely. Old billing systems talk to new databases. Patterns emerge where there was once static. The number pings near her neighborhood, closer than first believed. Close enough to narrow the field. Close enough to turn a suspicion into a direction. The man's name surfaces again, this time without hesitation. It's there in the old reports, underlined once, then forgotten. He knew the area. He knew her routine, at least enough to predict it. He had been questioned before, briefly, politely, back when there was nothing to hold him with. He denied everything. His alibi was thin but technically intact. No one pushed harder. Now, his life is laid out on a screen. Employment records. Addresses. Vehicles owned then and now. A pattern of proximity appears, not dramatic, not damning on its own, but persistent. He was always close to the edges of her world. Not inside it. Close enough to watch. Close enough to wait. Investigators reopen interviews with witnesses who are older now, slower to recall, but sometimes freer to speak. Time loosens loyalty. Old fears fade. One neighbor admits something they didn't think mattered back then. A truck idling longer than necessary. Parked at an odd angle. They didn't want to get involved. They assumed police already knew. Police didn't. Another witness corrects their own statement from years ago. The sound they heard wasn't glass. It wasn't a door. It was a voice. Raised. Sharp. Cut off too suddenly. They remember because they remember feeling relieved when it stopped, the way people do when tension breaks, not realizing until later that silence can be worse. The house is revisited, not physically, but through photographs, diagrams, notes scribbled in margins. The unlocked door is re-examined. Not as a mistake, but as a clue. Someone she recognized. Or someone she didn't fear yet. Someone who didn't need to force their way in. Someone who could step inside without triggering alarm. Her phone is still missing. Always missing. Never recovered. In 2003, phones were replaceable. Not yet extensions of the self. But even then, a missing phone mattered. It meant movement. It meant contact. It meant control. Whoever took her understood that. Or learned it quickly. The suspect is brought in again. This time, the room feels different. He's older. Slower. His confidence has edges now, frayed by time. He's told the case is being reviewed. He's told new information has come to light. His reaction is subtle, but it's there. A pause too long. A correction offered too quickly. Small tells that don't mean guilt, but don't mean innocence either. He sticks to his story. Always has. He says he barely knew her. Says he wasn't there that night. Says he has nothing to add. Investigators let him talk. They let the silence stretch. Silence is pressure. Silence invites mistakes. He fills it with details no one asked for. Timelines that don't quite align with records. Memories that seem rehearsed. Still, there is no confession. No dramatic break. No moment that feels like television. Real investigations rarely have those. What they have instead is accumulation. Layer upon layer of almost. Almost enough to charge. Almost enough to convince a jury. Almost enough to finally say what everyone has been circling for 20 years. The community catches wind of the reopened case before officials intend it to spread. It always leaks. A clerk talks. A retired officer mentions it at a bar. Social media does the rest. Old posts resurface. Speculation explodes. People start counting years, realizing where they were in 2003, realizing who they trusted then, who they might have trusted too much. Her family is notified quietly. A phone call. A careful explanation. Words chosen to manage hope. They've lived too long with disappointment to believe easily now. Still, something shifts. They hear the suspect's name and feel a cold recognition. It's not new to them. It never was. They've whispered it before, late at night, when no one else was listening. For investigators, the problem remains brutally simple. No body. No definitive cause of death. No physical evidence tying him directly to her disappearance. Time has eroded what little there was. Witness memories fade. Locations change. Potential crime scenes are paved over, renovated, forgotten. The past does not preserve itself for justice. They search again anyway. New technology. New methods. Ground-penetrating radar in areas previously overlooked. Cadaver dogs brought to land that once belonged to the suspect, land that has since changed hands. The searches draw attention. Cameras show up. Reporters stand at the edges of taped-off fields, narrating history as if it's unfolding live. Nothing is found. Again. Frustration builds inside the task force. They are closer than anyone has ever been, and still miles away. Identifying a likely killer is not enough. Likely doesn't hold up in court. Likely doesn't bring closure. Likely leaves room for doubt, and doubt is dangerous. The suspect knows this. He hires a lawyer. Stops talking. His silence is legal, smart, infuriating. He returns to his life with a shadow now attached to it. Neighbors recognize him. Strangers stare. The town watches him in a way it never did before. Suspicion becomes public. And yet, legally, he remains free. The phrase killer identified begins to appear in headlines, carefully worded, hedged with conditionals and sources close to the investigation. It hits hard anyway. For some, it's validation. For others, it's fear. If they know who did it, why isn't he arrested? What does it mean if knowing isn't enough? Inside the reopened file, a note is added. Not a conclusion. Not a resolution. Just a statement of direction. The case is no longer dormant. It is active. It has a face now, a name, a center of gravity. Everything else will orbit that. But the longer investigators stare into the past, the more they understand the trap they're in. Every unanswered question from 2003 is now multiplied by time. Every mistake, every missed opportunity, every assumption hardened into fact has consequences. The case didn't just go cold. It froze in place, preserving uncertainty. And as the investigation pushes forward, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. If the killer is indeed the man they believe him to be, then he has lived 20 years untouched by consequence. 20 years of normal life layered over an act that shattered a family and poisoned a town. The question now is not just what happened to her. It's how someone can disappear so completely, and how someone else can live so fully, in the shadow of that disappearance, while the truth waits, patient and unfinished, for someone to finally force it into the light. By the third week of the renewed investigation, the past no longer feels distant. It feels crowded. Every document pulled from the file seems to carry a second voice now, whispering what should have been asked, what should have been seen, what should have been understood before time buried the answers under routine and forgetting. Detectives stop treating 2003 like history and start treating it like a crime scene that never cooled, only waited. They focus on motive, the most uncomfortable question of all. Not who could have done it, but why. In the early years, investigators assumed randomness, a crime of opportunity, something sudden and unplanned. Now that assumption is cracked open. Patterns don't suggest chaos. They suggest familiarity. Timing too precise to be coincidence. Access too clean to be accidental. They re-examine the relationship that supposedly didn't exist. Phone records show no long conversations, no obvious connection, but absence can be misleading. Not every relationship leaves a digital footprint. Some are built in passing glances, routine overlaps, unspoken awareness. Workplaces nearby. Stores visited at similar hours. A shared geography that slowly erases anonymity. Witnesses from her workplace are contacted again. Some are reluctant. Some are eager. One remembers seeing her uncomfortable weeks before she vanished, brushing off a comment, dismissing it as stress. Another recalls a man lingering too long near the entrance, asking questions he didn't need answers to. At the time, it felt harmless. Now, it feels like rehearsal. The suspect's past is dissected piece by piece. Not just his criminal record, but his behavior. Arguments that escalated quickly. A tendency toward control. Former partners describe mood shifts, jealousy without cause, a need to know where people were and why. None of it proves murder. All of it sketches a silhouette that fits too well. Investigators map his movements on the night she disappeared using what little data exists. Cell tower pings. Old receipts. A gas station camera that captured his vehicle earlier than he claimed. He said he was home by 10. The timestamp says otherwise. It doesn't place him at her house. It places him closer than comfort allows. They look again at the unlocked door. It's no longer just a curiosity. It's central. An unlocked door means choice. Either hers or someone else's, made in seconds. Did she open it willingly? Did she hesitate? Was there a conversation that lasted just long enough for trust to override instinct? The theory shifts. Not a sudden abduction. Not a stranger dragging her into the night. Something quieter. An interaction that began normally. A voice she recognized. A reason to open the door. The danger didn't announce itself. It stepped inside. Her phone becomes the axis of the case. Why take it? To stop a call for help. To erase evidence. To maintain control. Investigators believe it left the house with her. They believe it was destroyed shortly after. Burned. Crushed. Tossed into water. Without it, her last moments remain locked away. The town feels the investigation tightening, like air pressure changing before a storm. People talk more openly now. Rumors that once felt cruel now feel necessary. The suspect's name is spoken without hesitation. Some say they always knew. Others insist that's impossible, that hindsight is rewriting memory. Both can be true. His behavior draws attention. He avoids familiar places. Keeps his head down. Watches the news more closely than before. Friends distance themselves. Silence becomes his shield, but silence also isolates. Every move he makes is interpreted, misinterpreted, magnified. Guilt or not, he is living under a microscope. The task force hits another wall when prosecutors weigh in. The evidence is compelling, they say. But compelling is not enough. Without remains, without forensic proof, the case risks collapsing in court. A failed prosecution would be worse than no prosecution at all. It would close the door permanently. Investigators are told to keep digging. Find something concrete. Anything. They revisit old search areas with modern tools. Fields are scanned again. Wells are checked. Construction sites from the early 2000s are reviewed, records pulled to see where earth was moved, where something could have been hidden and lost forever. One lead sends them to a stretch of land once owned by the suspect's family. Remote. Quiet. Changed now, but recognizable. Cadaver dogs alert briefly, then lose the scent. Ground-penetrating radar shows disturbances that could be anything. Old trash pits. Animal remains. Or something else entirely. Excavation turns up nothing definitive. Hope rises, then collapses. The family is updated cautiously. They've learned to read between the lines. No findings doesn't mean no truth. It means the truth remains buried deeper than tools can reach. Their grief shifts again, from waiting to anger. 20 years is a long time to hold a wound open. Investigators revisit the suspect's earlier interviews, listening not to what he says, but how he says it. His language is careful, distanced. He refers to her as that woman, never by name. He corrects dates unnecessarily. He volunteers information about unrelated events, as if trying to anchor himself somewhere else in time. A psychological profile is updated, not as a substitute for evidence, but as a guide. The profile suggests someone who could compartmentalize, who could commit an act and then seal it away, returning to normal life without visible cracks. Someone who would believe, over time, that silence equals safety. The media intensifies coverage. Headlines sharpen. Cold case killer identified spreads faster than the nuance beneath it. Public pressure builds. The department feels it. Prosecutors feel it. Everyone involved feels the weight of expectation pressing down on a case that still refuses to break open. Online, theories multiply. Amateur sleuths dig through public records, connect dots that professionals already know and others that don't exist. Some accuse the wrong people. Some stumble close to the truth by accident. The noise grows louder, and within it, clarity becomes harder to maintain. The suspect's lawyer issues statements. Strong words. Claims of harassment. Assertions of innocence. Warnings about trial by media. It's all expected. It changes nothing. The focus remains on the missing woman, not the man accused without charges. Investigators find one more inconsistency. Small. Almost dismissible. A receipt from the night in question that places the suspect farther away than his cell phone data suggests he was. The discrepancy shouldn't exist. One of those records is wrong, or deliberately misleading. It raises the possibility of manipulation, of an attempt to create distance after the fact. Still, the clock keeps moving. Time is no longer an ally. Witnesses are aging. Memories are thinning. Evidence degrades quietly. The case exists in a narrow window where action is possible, but certainty remains just out of reach. Late one night, alone with the file, an investigator writes a note in the margin of a report. Not a theory. Not an accusation. Just a sentence. If we're right, he didn't just take her life. He took our chance to know how. That sentence lingers because it captures the real cost of waiting. Not just justice delayed, but truth eroded. The longer the case remains unresolved, the more the unknown hardens into something permanent. Outside, the town goes on. Kids who weren't born in 2003 graduate high school. New stores replace old ones. The streets look different. But underneath it all, the disappearance still hums, a low-frequency anxiety that never fully fades. And somewhere within that hum is the knowledge that the answer exists, solid and complete, locked inside a past that refuses to give it up easily, daring investigators to come closer, to push harder, knowing that even if they do, the truth may finally emerge too late to feel like a victory. By the fourth phase of the investigation, the case has stopped behaving like a missing person file and started acting like something heavier, something closer to a murder that simply refuses to reveal its body. Detectives no longer ask if something violent happened. They ask how long it took, and where the mistake was that allowed it to disappear without a trace. The questions sharpen. The patience thins. They return to the suspect's timeline again, this time not as a straight line but as a pressure test. Every hour is bent, stretched, stressed to see where it snaps. His alibi, once passable, now looks fragile. Not false in a way that collapses instantly, but false in the way that requires constant maintenance. Stories adjusted. Details added later. Memories suddenly clearer when challenged. One investigator notices a pattern in his statements. When asked direct questions, he answers narrowly. When left alone to talk, he wanders. He fills space with irrelevant detail, as if drowning the important moments in noise. It's a tactic, conscious or not. And it's been working for 20 years. They start looking at vehicles. Not just the one he owned in 2003, but every vehicle he had access to. borrowed trucks, family cars, work vans. One stands out, not because it's suspicious, but because it disappears from records shortly after her disappearance. Sold cheap. No clear reason. No documentation beyond a transfer and a shrug. Investigators track it as far as they can. It changes hands twice, then vanishes into salvage records. Crushed. Destroyed. Any trace that might have existed is gone now, flattened into scrap. Another door quietly closing. Attention shifts back to the house. Not her house, but his. The one he lived in then. Photos from old listings. Satellite images archived from the early 2000s. The backyard appears unremarkable, but there's a stretch of ground that looks freshly disturbed in images taken months after she vanished. Landscaping. Normal. Suspicious only in hindsight. By now, it's been redone twice. Whatever was there is long gone. They interview former neighbors. Most remember nothing. One remembers him digging late at night, lights on, long after normal hours. At the time, it meant nothing. People work on their yards. People have insomnia. But paired with everything else, it lands heavier. The case begins to split the town in ways it never did before. Some residents want answers at any cost. Others worry about accusing the wrong person after so much time. Old friendships strain. Conversations end abruptly when his name comes up. The past is no longer safely sealed away. It's arguing with the present. Her family is asked again about enemies, conflicts, secrets. They have none to give. She lived simply. Carefully. She trusted people. That trust now feels like a vulnerability she was punished for, and the family wrestles with guilt they don't deserve but can't escape. Investigators pursue a theory they avoided before: escalation. That what happened wasn't planned as murder, but became one. A confrontation that spun out of control. Words that sharpened into threats. Hands that didn't know when to stop. Panic that followed. Cleanup. Silence. Survival. The suspect fits that theory uncomfortably well. Not a mastermind. Not a criminal genius. Just someone capable of violence in the wrong moment, then capable of hiding from it afterward. Someone who benefited not from brilliance, but from time. They try again for a confession, indirectly. Not an interrogation, but a conversation. Appeals to conscience. To fatigue. To the idea that carrying a secret this long is its own prison. He listens. He says nothing. His eyes stay flat. If there's guilt there, it's buried deep enough to be unreachable. The task force considers an arrest anyway, weighing risk versus reward. An arrest would be dramatic. It would satisfy public demand. It might pressure him to talk. Or it might fail spectacularly, handing him permanent freedom. The debate is tense. Careers hover in the balance. So does the truth. Meanwhile, the media reframes the story again. Not just a cold case reopened, but a system questioned. How could someone vanish like this? How could suspicion linger for decades without resolution? The story is no longer just about her. It's about failure. Institutional, collective, human. Investigators discover one more overlooked detail from 2003. A partial footprint near her back entrance. Too degraded then to analyze. Now, with modern techniques, it yields something minimal but unsettling. Not a match. Not exclusion either. Just another almost. The case is built of almosts now, stacked precariously. The pressure mounts when a former associate of the suspect comes forward anonymously. Says he once bragged, drunk, angry, about getting away with something big. No names. No specifics. Just enough to raise alarms. Not enough to stand on its own. The associate refuses to testify publicly. Fear still works, even after 20 years. Investigators start to realize something else. If the suspect did this, he didn't act alone in the aftermath. Someone helped him. Covered. Looked away. Provided silence. Not out of loyalty, but convenience. The case isn't just one secret. It's a shared one. They look for that second silence. They examine who benefited. Who asked no questions. Who accepted explanations that didn't quite add up. The web widens, then tightens again, collapsing back toward the same center. Late one evening, an investigator visits the edge of town where fields stretch into darkness. They stand there, imagining the choices made 20 years earlier. Where to turn? Where not to stop? How far is far enough? Texas offers too many answers to that question. The realization settles in slowly, painfully. The case may never produce the proof they need. The killer may never face a courtroom. Justice, in its formal sense, may be unreachable. But identification changes things. It rewrites memory. It reframes history. It strips away the illusion that this was random, unknowable, beyond understanding. Someone did this. Someone known. Someone real. And for the first time since 2003, the disappearance stops being a question mark and starts becoming a shadow with a shape. Not complete. Not finished. But undeniable. The town feels it. The family feels it. The suspect feels it most of all. Because even without handcuffs, even without a verdict, the silence that once protected him is breaking. And once silence breaks, it never truly heals. By the fifth movement of the investigation, the case has begun to exert a gravity of its own. It pulls everything toward it, old grudges, forgotten conversations, half-remembered moments people once dismissed as nothing. The reopened cold case is no longer just a file on a desk. It's a presence. It follows detectives home. It creeps into dreams. It sits heavy in the quiet moments when the phones stop ringing. What unsettles the task force most is not what they know, but how much sense it all makes now. The night. The timing. The access. The silence afterward. It fits together too neatly, like a picture assembled long after the box was thrown away. And that neatness raises a new fear. If it feels this clear now, how did they miss it then? They go back to 2003 again, not through reports this time, but through culture. Through habits. Through the way people lived before constant tracking, before cameras on every corner, before phones became witnesses. Back then, you could disappear more easily. Back then, a lie only had to survive human memory, not digital permanence. The suspect understood that world. He moved through it comfortably. He knew when people slept. He knew when streets went quiet. He knew which places were empty and which were merely forgotten. The case suggests planning without calling it planning, awareness without sophistication. A man shaped by his environment, using it without overthinking. Investigators study his behavior in the years after the disappearance. Not for guilt, but for adaptation. Did he change? Did he unravel? Did he overcorrect? The answer is unsettling in its ordinariness. He didn't spiral. He didn't flee. He stayed. He worked. He formed relationships. He lived as though nothing had happened, or as though what had happened belonged to someone else. That, more than anything, disturbs the family. They sit across from detectives in a small room that smells faintly of old coffee and disinfectant, listening to updates that are careful, measured, restrained. They want anger. They want certainty. They want someone to say, "This is the man. This is what he did." Instead, they get probability. They get language designed to survive scrutiny. Still, they ask the question they've carried for 2 decades. Did she suffer? No one answers it directly. There is no way to. The absence of remains means the absence of narrative. No final moments. No proof of pain or mercy. The truth is suspended in a space that can't be filled without speculation. And speculation, detectives know, can be as cruel as ignorance. The family leaves with more information than they had before and less peace than they hoped for. Knowing who likely did it does not heal the wound. It sharpens it. It gives grief a direction, but not a destination. Meanwhile, the suspect's life continues to constrict. He is not charged, but he is marked. Friends stop calling. Invitations dry up. People cross the street when they see him. In a town this size, reputation is oxygen. Once it thins, breathing becomes difficult. He complains to his lawyer. Says he's being punished without trial. Says the police are poisoning the community against him. In a sense, he's right. But no one can separate his discomfort from the weight of the accusation hanging over him. Sympathy is in short supply. Investigators attempt one more strategy: pressure through exposure. Not media leaks, not accusations, but transparency. They release selected details, carefully vetted, designed to prompt memory. They ask the public to think back, to reconsider, to remember anything that once felt small. The response is immediate. Calls flood in. Some useless. Some strange. One woman reports seeing a man matching the suspect's description washing something from the bed of a truck in the early hours of the morning, days after the disappearance. She didn't call then. She assumed it was work-related. She assumed police knew. Police did not. The problem is timing. Memory after 20 years is unstable. Defense attorneys feast on that instability. They dismantle recollections with ease. Were you sure it was that night? That truck? That man? Doubt erodes everything it touches. The case edges closer to its breaking point. Either something definitive emerges, or it doesn't. There is no middle ground anymore. The department feels the strain. Funding is questioned. Resources are finite. New crimes compete for attention. The cold case threatens to become cold again, this time by choice rather than neglect. An internal debate surfaces quietly but urgently. Is justice still possible without certainty? Is it ethical to move forward knowing the case rests on inference and pattern rather than irrefutable fact? Or is it more unethical to stop now, knowing who most likely took her, and allow him to age into anonymity? There are no clean answers. One night, an investigator drives the route believed to be taken after the disappearance. It's long. Isolated. The kind of road where headlights feel like the only things in the world. They imagine the silence inside the vehicle. The tension. The knowledge that whatever happens next will change everything. That imagined drive becomes a theory. Not provable. Not admissible. But plausible. And plausibility, after 20 years, feels dangerously close to truth. The suspect senses the shift. He becomes more withdrawn. More defensive. He stops responding to informal contact. Everything goes through his lawyer now. He is building walls where once there were cracks. Time taught him that walls work. The task force receives a final analysis from forensic consultants. A summary of what can and cannot be proven. The language is precise, unforgiving. Probability high. Certainty insufficient. Recommendation: continue investigation if new evidence emerges. Otherwise, reconsider viability. The word viability lands hard. It sounds like surrender dressed up as professionalism. The family is informed again. They ask if there will be an arrest. The answer is not yet. Maybe never. The room goes quiet. This time, the silence feels heavier than any answer could. Outside, the town has moved on invisible ways. New businesses. New roads. New names on mailboxes. But beneath it all, the reopened cold case has reopened something else too, the understanding that safety was once an illusion, and maybe still is. The suspect remains free, but not untouched. The investigation has stripped away the comfort of invisibility. Every day now is lived under the weight of what people believe he did. He may never hear a verdict spoken aloud, but judgment has already settled in the spaces around him. And for the investigators, the case enters its most dangerous phase. Not the search. Not the accusation. But the waiting. The waiting to see if truth will surface on its own, or if it will remain buried, preserved forever by time, chance, and the terrible efficiency of silence. Because the longer the case lingers here, unresolved but defined, the clearer one thing becomes. Some crimes don't end when they happen. They end when people stop looking. And no one involved in this case is ready to stop looking yet. By the sixth turn of the story, the investigation has narrowed into something tense and fragile, like glass stretched thin. Every movement risks a fracture. Every decision carries consequence. The task force understands now that they are no longer chasing discovery. They are chasing collapse, the moment when something held too tightly for too long finally gives way. They begin where pressure works best, routine. The suspect's routines are examined with surgical precision. Where he goes. When he leaves. Who still speaks to him. Patterns repeat. Patterns always do. He shops at the same stores, parks in the same spots, drives the same roads. A man who believes consistency is safety, that predictability looks like innocence. It often does. Until it doesn't. Investigators don't follow him aggressively. No obvious tails. No confrontation. They let him feel alone, not hunted. Isolation has a way of amplifying noise inside a person's head. And noise leads to mistakes. At the same time, they revisit the timeline from a new angle, not what happened to her, but what happened after. Crimes don't end with disappearance. They continue through cleanup, disposal, concealment. That phase is often sloppier. Panic leaves fingerprints where intent did not. Records are pulled from municipal dumps, landfills, scrap yards operating in the weeks after her disappearance. In 2003, oversight was looser. Documentation thinner. Still, names appear. Trucks logged. One of them links back indirectly to the suspect. Not proof. But proximity again. Always proximity. They examine water. Lakes. Retention ponds. Drainage systems. Texas reshaped its land aggressively in the early 2000s. Construction erased geography. Anything placed in the wrong spot at the right time could vanish permanently. Engineers are consulted. Maps layered over maps. Possibility spreads outward like a stain. Nothing surfaces. The frustration sharpens into something personal. Investigators argue. Not loudly. Quietly. Over details. Over priorities. Over whether they are still pursuing justice or merely chasing their own belief. This is where cold cases die a second time, when certainty turns into obsession and discipline slips. Leadership intervenes. Brings them back to ground. Reminds them that belief, no matter how strong, is not evidence. The reminder stings because it's true. The family watches all of this from the outside, informed but powerless. They begin to feel like spectators to their own tragedy, dependent on processes they don't control. Anger finds new targets now, not just the suspect, but time itself, the system, the endless caution that feels like cowardice when viewed through grief. They ask a different question now. If not arrest, then what? What does justice look like when certainty is unavailable? No one answers that either. The suspect senses the stall. He relaxes slightly. Not openly. But the tension in his movements eases. He starts appearing in public again, cautiously testing the temperature. He watches reactions. Measures distance. He is learning what he can survive. Investigators notice. They bring in a behavioral specialist, someone who has seen men like this before. Not monsters. Not masterminds. Just people who learned early that denial is a muscle that grows stronger with use. The specialist reviews interview tapes, pauses on moments others overlooked. A tightening jaw. A breath held too long. A flicker of irritation when her name is spoken. The assessment is blunt. If he did this, he will never confess voluntarily. Confession would shatter the internal narrative that kept him functional. He didn't just hide the crime from others. He hid it from himself. That means the case hinges on someone else. Someone who knows something. Someone who has lived 20 years with a secret that once felt manageable and now feels corrosive. Someone who helped, or watched, or understood without being told. The investigators shift focus subtly. They look at the suspect's circle then versus now. Who stayed close? Who drifted away suddenly? Who changed behavior after 2003? A former friend stands out. A falling out that was never explained. Silence that arrived too abruptly. They approach carefully. Not as police. As listeners. The conversation is long. Meandering. Filled with memory gaps and defensiveness. But there is something underneath it, fear mixed with relief. The friend doesn't confess to anything. Doesn't accuse anyone. But he admits this: there was a night when the suspect showed up shaken. Angry. Demanding help without explaining why. He says he didn't ask questions. Says he didn't want to know. Says he regrets that now. Regret is not testimony. But it's close. The legal team reviews the statement. It strengthens the narrative. It does not complete it. Still not enough. The case hovers in this state for weeks. Alive. Breathing. But not moving forward. Then something unexpected happens. The suspect makes a mistake. It's small. Almost invisible. He mentions a detail in a casual conversation that was never made public. A detail only someone present, or directly informed, could know. The wrong time. The wrong phrasing. The wrong certainty. It's documented immediately. Cross-checked. Verified. The room goes quiet when investigators realize what they have. Not a confession. Not a smoking gun. But a fracture in the wall he's built for 2 decades. They bring him back in. This interview feels different. Tighter. Focused. They don't accuse. They don't raise their voices. They let him talk, then gently place the detail on the table between them like an object he doesn't recognize at first. He freezes. Just for a second. But it's enough. He backtracks. Tries to explain. Tries to say it was a guess, something he heard later, something everyone knew. It wasn't. Everyone didn't. The interview ends without arrest. But the tone has shifted permanently. The balance of power moves, just slightly, toward the truth. Outside, the town feels it again. That subtle change in air. That sense that something long buried has shifted underground. The family is told there has been progress. Not resolution. Not yet. But progress. They nod. They've learned not to celebrate steps anymore. Steps don't bring her back. Steps don't guarantee answers. Still, that night, for the first time in years, one of them allows themselves to believe that the silence might not hold forever. Because secrets can survive time. But they don't survive pressure. And the pressure is finally, undeniably, building. By the 7th stretch of the investigation, the case has entered its most volatile state, the phase where everything looks solid on the surface but could shatter with a single misstep. Detectives feel it in the way meetings run long and end abruptly, in the way reports are rewritten again and again, each word weighed not just for accuracy but for survivability. This is no longer about finding information. It's about not losing what they finally have. The suspect knows something has changed. He doesn't need to be told. People like him sense shifts the way animals sense weather. He becomes careful again, overly careful, the kind of careful that draws attention because it arrives too late. His routines tighten. His conversations shorten. He stops filling silence. Silence, once his enemy, becomes his refuge. Investigators exploit that shift quietly. They don't chase him. They don't provoke him. They let him sit with the knowledge that he slipped, that something he said cannot be unsaid. The psychological weight of that mistake is heavier than any accusation. It lives in his head. It rewinds endlessly. Behind the scenes, prosecutors are looped in more aggressively now. The case is laid out from start to present, not as a story but as a structure. Timelines stacked. Statements compared. Behavioral analysis threaded through physical absence. It's unconventional. Risky. But it's what they have. The legal response is cautious, almost cold. A charge without a body is possible, but brutal. The burden is immense. Jurors demand certainty. Defense attorneys thrive on doubt. Every missing piece becomes a weapon for the other side. Still, the conversation has changed. It's no longer if charges could be considered. It's how and when, and what would be lost if they fail. The family is informed again, and again they sit in that same room, listening to words like momentum and leverage. They've learned that these words mean nothing concrete. They nod anyway. Their grief has become procedural, folded neatly into scheduled updates and controlled expectations. Outside that room, anger builds in a different way. The community begins to fracture openly now. Some demand immediate arrest. Others warn against destroying a man's life without definitive proof. Yard signs appear. Online arguments turn personal. The case has stopped being history and become identity. The suspect becomes a symbol whether he wants to or not. To some, he is the face of evil unpunished. To others, he is evidence of a system gone too far. He carries that contradiction everywhere now, and it hardens him. Sympathy dies in that space. What replaces it is resolve. Investigators follow a new thread pulled from the suspect's slip. The detail he revealed points to a location never officially confirmed. A place discussed internally but never released. They cross-check old notes. That location appears once, buried in a draft report, later removed. How did he know? They revisit it with urgency. Not with hope, but with obligation. The land has changed. Fences moved. Ownership transferred. Permission is obtained. Searches begin again, methodical and quiet, away from cameras this time. The ground yields nothing visible. No remains. No artifacts. But soil analysis reveals disturbance inconsistent with declared activity from that period. It doesn't say what was buried. It says something was. It's enough to add weight. Enough to make the case heavier, more real, more dangerous. The suspect is informed indirectly that the area has been searched. His reaction is muted, but his posture shifts. He grows defensive in conversations not about the case at all. Small irritations spark anger. Control slips at the edges. A second interview is scheduled. This time, it's not about catching him in a lie. It's about confronting him with inevitability. Investigators outline what they know, not dramatically, not accusingly, but calmly, piece by piece. The phone call. The proximity. The vehicle. The slip. The land. They leave space between facts, letting silence do the work. He denies everything again. His voice holds. His hands don't. He grips the chair too tightly. He leans forward when he should lean back. Stress leaks through the cracks now, visible to anyone trained to see it. At one point, he says something unexpected. He says, "You'll never prove it." It's not a confession. It's not even an admission. But it's not innocence either. The interview ends without resolution, but no one expects one anymore. What matters is accumulation. The case is no longer hollow. It has density. It presses back. Prosecutors begin drafting a theoretical charge, not to file, but to test. They examine how the story would sound in a courtroom, how it would withstand attack, where it would break. Weak points glow under that light. So do strengths. They know this: if they move forward, they may lose. If they don't, they guarantee that nothing changes. The family is asked, quietly, what they want. It's an unfair question, and everyone knows it. They answer anyway. They say they want truth on the record. They want her name spoken in a courtroom. They want the world to acknowledge what happened, even if punishment never follows. That answer matters more than anyone admits. The community holds its breath. Rumors of impending action spread. Police cars are watched. Every movement is interpreted as a sign. Anxiety becomes collective. The suspect retreats further, surrounded now only by lawyers and walls. He has survived 2 decades by staying just beyond reach. Now, reach feels closer than ever. And the investigators understand something crucial in this moment. This case will not end cleanly. There will be no perfect closure. No moment where everything clicks into place and grief dissolves into justice. What they are deciding now is simpler and harder. Whether silence is acceptable. Because once a case reaches this point, once a name is attached, once the truth has a shape, doing nothing becomes its own decision. And decisions, unlike mysteries, leave fingerprints. The question is no longer what happened in Texas in 2003. The question is what will happen now, when the past finally refuses to stay quiet. By the 8th movement, the investigation feels less like pursuit and more like a standoff. Not between police and suspect, but between truth and time. Everything that can be found has been found. Everything that can be connected has been connected. What remains is fragile, human, and dangerously incomplete. The task force enters a phase they never name out loud: preparation for failure. They don't stop working. They don't slow down. But the work changes shape. Less searching. More preservation. They lock down what they have, documenting every step, anticipating every attack. If this case moves forward, it must survive not just scrutiny, but hostility. Every statement is re-recorded. Every witness is re-interviewed on camera. Not to change their stories, but to freeze them in time before memory erodes further. The tone is gentle. No pressure. No promises. Just the understanding that this may be the last chance for their voices to matter. Some witnesses falter. Some contradict themselves. Some cry. A few withdraw entirely, frightened by the attention, by the idea of being responsible for a verdict. Their hesitation becomes part of the record too. Truth is not clean. It rarely is. The suspect's legal team escalates. Formal letters. Accusations of misconduct. Threats of civil action. They know pressure when they see it, and they apply it back. The goal is not just defense. It's deterrence. Make the case too costly to pursue. Internally, the department weighs optics against obligation. A high-profile failure could damage public trust. A refusal to act could damage it just as badly. There is no path that doesn't wound something. The media senses the tension and leans in hard. Language sharpens again. On the brink. Sources say. Imminent decision. Speculation fills the gaps where facts cannot go. The story becomes louder than the investigation, and investigators retreat further into silence. The family feels the shift immediately. Updates become less frequent. Language becomes more cautious. They understand why, but understanding doesn't make it easier. Hope, once reignited, now flickers unpredictably. Too much hope hurts. Too little feels like surrender. One family member begins revisiting old boxes at home. Letters. Photos. Calendars. Anything from 2003. They aren't looking for evidence. They're looking for her. For reminders that she existed beyond a case number, beyond a missing person poster. They find a note she wrote, mundane and unfinished. A grocery list. A reminder to call someone back. It ends abruptly, mid-thought. The ordinary cruelty of that hits harder than any theory. Lives don't end with conclusions. They end in fragments. Investigators receive a final expert review from a retired prosecutor known for taking impossible cases to trial. His assessment is honest, unvarnished. The case is winnable, he says. But only if framed correctly. Only if the jury understands absence not as weakness, but as consequence. The absence of a body is not proof of nothing, he argues. It is proof of intent. Someone made sure there would be no body. That decision itself tells a story. It's a gamble. But every option now is. The suspect is informed that prosecutors are considering next steps. The news lands differently than expected. He doesn't explode. He doesn't threaten. He goes quiet. Quieter than before. The silence around him thickens, heavy with calculation. For a moment, investigators wonder if this is it. If pressure has finally reached the point where confession becomes relief. They wait. Nothing comes. Days pass. Then weeks. The silence holds. The task force begins drafting a final recommendation. Not a conclusion. A direction. Move forward or stand down. Each line is debated. Each word feels permanent. Careers, reputations, and a family's last chance at public truth hang in the balance. When the recommendation reaches leadership, it carries a weight that has nothing to do with paper. It carries 20 years of waiting. 20 years of unanswered questions. 20 years of a woman absent from the world in ways that cannot be measured. Leadership hesitates. Not out of fear. Out of responsibility. Once this door opens, it cannot be closed again. Outside the official process, something else is happening quietly. The suspect's world has shrunk to almost nothing. He avoids places. Avoids people. Lives in a narrowing corridor between home and necessity. This is not justice, but it is consequence. And it is not enough. One evening, alone, an investigator listens again to the original 2003 dispatch call. The voice on the tape sounds distant, unaware of what would follow. The simplicity of it is brutal. A report. A concern. A life about to fracture into decades of uncertainty. They realize then that the case has already changed history, regardless of what happens next. It has altered how this town understands safety. How families lock doors. How police read silence. The damage is done. The only question left is whether truth will be acknowledged or left implied. The family is invited in one last time before a decision is made. No promises. No headlines. Just honesty. They are told what can happen and what might not. They listen. They ask one question. Will her name be spoken? The answer is yes. One way or another, it will be. That night, the town sleeps uneasily. Not because of danger, but because of anticipation. Something is about to end, or fail to end, and both possibilities feel equally heavy. The cold case has been reopened, examined, pulled apart, and held up to the light. Now it stands at the edge of resolution, staring into a future that may never offer certainty, only acknowledgement. And sometimes, in cases like this, acknowledgement is the closest thing to justice the living are ever going to get. The files don't make noise, but tonight they feel loud, stacked on the table like bricks pulled from a collapsed wall, each one carrying dust and weight and a smell that never quite leaves your hands. And the room hums with the low electric whine of a building after hours, the kind of hum that makes you feel watched even when you're alone, because this is where the story turns from rumor to record, from whispers to ink, from fear to procedure, and every page turned sounds like a small betrayal. Of the silence that protected someone for 20 years, because silence was the killer's greatest accomplice and it did its job well. The timeline stretches across the desk, pinned and repinned, red string crossing out old assumptions, looping back on itself, a knot where the night of the murder refuses to behave, and as the hours drag past midnight, the case begins to speak in a different voice, less chaotic, more precise, as if the truth has grown tired of waiting and is finally ready to be specific. The new analysis doesn't scream. It whispers numbers and probabilities and patterns, the language of labs and software, the calm cadence of a machine that doesn't care who gets hurt as long as the math works out. And the math works out in a way it never did before, because the DNA that once sat like a question mark now points with a steady finger toward a man who lived close enough to hear the sirens that night, close enough to smell the rain, close enough to blend into the crowd that gathered. Under yellow tape the next morning, a man whose name appears in old police logs not as a suspect but as a neighbor, a witness, someone who offered coffee and condolences, someone who knew how to perform grief without leaving fingerprints. His name doesn't feel dramatic when you first read it. It feels ordinary, almost disappointing, like the villain in a nightmare turning out to be the guy next door who mows his lawn on Sundays. The discovery doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives in pieces, a partial match upgraded to a full one, a genealogical tree that forks and narrows, distant cousins lighting up like faint stars until the constellation makes sense, and suddenly the center of gravity shifts, because the case isn't about what happened anymore, it's about who was there, and the who is no longer hypothetical. The investigators move carefully, because history has taught them that cold cases are fragile things, that certainty can shatter if you squeeze it too hard, and so they verify and re-verify, cross-check dates, addresses, employment records, the boring stuff that makes or breaks the extraordinary, and every check comes back clean in the same unsettling way, as if the truth has been sitting quietly in the corner, arms crossed, waiting to be acknowledged. They pull the man's file from storage, yellowed at the edges, thin because no one ever thought to add to it, and the details read like a disguise assembled from normalcy, a steady job, a modest house, no violent record, no dramatic downward spiral, just a life that continued uninterrupted while another family's life froze in a single, brutal moment. The man moved on, the town did not. The town kept the wound open with anniversaries and candlelight vigils and late-night conversations that always ended the same way, with shrugs and sighs and the phrase everyone hated most, "We may never know." That phrase is crossed out now, not officially, not yet, but emotionally, because once you see a face behind the data, once you imagine a man stepping back into the shadows as the sirens grow louder, the case stops being abstract and starts being personal in a way that makes your pulse jump. The re-interviews begin quietly, without press releases or camera crews, because shock is more effective when it arrives unannounced, and doors open slowly to the knock of investigators who weren't there the first time around, whose badges look newer, whose eyes carry the weight of knowing that this conversation might rewrite a neighborhood's history. People remember him in fragments, the way he stood with his hands in his pockets, the way he asked too many questions, the way he knew details he shouldn't have known and no one noticed because everyone was overwhelmed, and grief makes you generous with assumptions. Someone recalls a comment that didn't sit right even then, a joke that fell flat, a sentence that seemed rehearsed, and these memories don't feel like revelations so much as confirmations, pieces clicking into place with a soft, nauseating certainty. The suspect's movements that night are reconstructed with a precision that borders on obsession, because obsession is what the case has earned after 2 decades of neglect, and the map lights up with his route. Ordinary streets transformed into a corridor of opportunity, each turn a chance to stop, to reconsider, to choose a different ending, and yet the route ends where it always did, at the same address, the same patch of ground that has been photographed and rephotographed until it feels unreal, like a movie set built over real pain. The timeline tightens, minutes shaved down to seconds, and the window that once seemed too narrow now yawns wide enough to swallow every doubt. What shocks the investigators most isn't the match itself, but how easily the past rearranges itself around it, how conversations from years ago suddenly sound different, how decisions that once seemed cautious now feel like missed opportunities, and there's an unspoken understanding in the room that this isn't just about catching someone. It's about acknowledging that the system failed in a way that allowed a killer to age in peace. That realization sits heavy, because justice delayed doesn't just hurt the victims, it corrodes the people sworn to protect them, turning confidence into caution, caution into paralysis. They bring him in under the pretense of routine, because routine lowers defenses, and the interview room looks exactly like it did in 2003, same scuff table, same flickering light, same sense that time behaves strangely here, looping and stalling and then rushing forward without warning. He sits comfortably at first, the posture of a man who has never been accused of anything serious, who has spent years perfecting the art of being unremarkable, and his answers flow easily, practiced but not robotic, because he's had 20 years to rehearse this performance in his head, to polish the version of events that kept him free. But the questions have changed, the pauses longer, the silence heavier, and when the investigators lay out the science in plain language, when they explain how a drop of sweat can outlive a lie, something flickers across his face, a micro-expression so brief you might miss it if you weren't looking for it, the look of a man realizing that the future he planned no longer exists. He doesn't confess, not outright, not dramatically, because real life rarely offers that kind of closure, but his story frays at the edges, timelines slip, details contradict, and the confidence drains from his voice in a way that no amount of coaching can hide, and the room feels smaller as the net tightens, as if the walls themselves are leaning in to listen. Outside, the town goes about its business, unaware that the ghost they've been living with is finally being given a name, that the question mark hanging over their history is starting to harden into a period. The investigators leave the room knowing that certainty is close but not yet complete, that the case will demand more proof, more patience, more nights like this one where the coffee goes cold and the files pile up and the hum of the building becomes a companion, and yet there's a shift in the air that can't be ignored, a sense that the story is no longer drifting, that it's moving toward an ending whether anyone is ready or not. The victim's family hasn't been told yet, not officially, because hope is a dangerous thing when it's been withheld for so long, and no one wants to offer it until it can be delivered whole, without caveats or conditions. As dawn creeps up on the windows, turning the glass into a pale mirror, the case rests in a strange in-between state, no longer cold, not yet resolved, a wound reopened in the hope that this time it will heal correctly, and the town sleeps under the weight of a truth that is about to wake it up. Somewhere, a man who believed he had outrun his past sits with the knowledge that time has finally caught up, and the silence that protected him for 20 years begins to crack, letting in a sound he hasn't heard since that night in Texas, a sound that feels like inevitability, like footsteps in a hallway that only grow louder, never fading, never stopping. Morning doesn't arrive gently in this town, it arrives like a notification you didn't ask for, a vibration that rattles windows and nerves at the same time. Because by the time the sun lifts itself over the flat Texas horizon, the secret is already leaking, not in headlines yet, not in names, but in tone, in the way phones ring a second longer before someone answers, in the way people pause mid-sentence as if they've all sensed the same shift in pressure. Something is happening. Something old is moving again. And when a cold case moves, it doesn't glide forward, it drags everything behind it, years and guilt and unanswered questions scraping loudly along the ground. Inside the department, the mood hardens into focus. There's no celebration, no quiet satisfaction, only a sharpened urgency, because now that the path is visible, every step has to be perfect. One mistake, one overreach, one loose word to the wrong person, and the entire structure collapses under the weight of its own anticipation. The evidence is revisited again, not because it's weak, but because it's strong enough to demand respect. Chain of custody. Storage logs. Who touched what, when, and why? Every box opened feels like opening a time capsule that still smells like fear and rain and metal, and each item inside is treated less like an object and more like a witness who's waited too long to be heard. The forensic results are expanded, pushed through new models, new databases, the kind of systems that didn't exist when the murder was fresh and emotions did the driving. Now it's algorithms and probabilities, cold logic applied to a crime that was anything but cold when it happened. The DNA doesn't just match, it situates itself, anchoring the suspect in a web of biological inevitability, a truth so impersonal it feels cruel. Blood doesn't forget. Skin cells don't lie. The body keeps records long after the mind convinces itself it's safe. The suspect is brought in again, this time without pretense, and the room seems to recognize him now, the walls absorbing his presence differently, as if they know his history even if he won't acknowledge it. He looks older under this light, not just in years but in weight, the weight of carrying a secret through weddings and funerals, through job changes and small talk and nights where he probably told himself he'd won. His lawyer sits beside him, professional, alert, already calculating angles and exits, but even legal language has limits when confronted with biology, and the explanations grow quieter, more careful, as the evidence is laid out piece by piece. The questioning is surgical. No accusations shouted, no dramatic reveals. Just questions that circle and tighten, that force him to either align with the facts or contradict himself into a corner. His answers slow. His gaze drifts to the table, to the tiny scratches carved into its surface by decades of hands that came before him, hands that shook, hands that clenched, hands that realized too late that the room they were in was not built for escape. He asks for breaks more often now. He drinks water like it might wash something away. It doesn't. Outside the building, the first official whispers turn into murmurs, and murmurs turn into conversations that happen too loudly for comfort. Someone knows someone who heard something. A reporter calls an old contact. A retired officer gets a message that makes his stomach drop. The phrase "cold case reopened" moves through the town like a spark, lighting up old arguments and reopening wounds people thought they'd learned to live with. For years, the mystery was a kind of shared identity, a tragedy without an ending that everyone carried together. Now that ending feels close enough to touch, and it scares them more than the uncertainty ever did. The victim's family is finally brought in, seated in a room that smells faintly of disinfectant and old paper, the kind of neutral environment designed to soften blows that can't be softened. The words are chosen carefully, because hope, once reintroduced, can be as dangerous as despair. They're told about new evidence, about progress, about a suspect whose name lands like a dropped plate, loud and impossible to ignore. Faces change in real time, disbelief giving way to something sharper, something like relief edged with anger, because relief after 20 years feels almost obscene. Why now? Why not then? Why did it take so long for the world to care enough to listen? Their reactions don't follow a script. There's no single moment of catharsis, no clean release. There are questions that can't be answered and tears that come without warning, triggered by memories that never really faded, only learned how to hide. They ask what happens next, and the answer is complicated, full of legal steps and conditional language, because justice isn't a straight line, it's a process, slow and fragile, that can still be derailed if handled poorly. But there's a promise in the room now, not an outcome, but an effort, and for a family that has lived in limbo for 2 decades, effort feels like oxygen. As the day wears on, the pressure mounts. Prosecutors review the file with the intensity of people who know this case will define them, that it will be scrutinized not just by a jury but by history, by every cold case advocate who has ever argued that time should not be a shield. They debate charges, weigh strategies, consider how a jury will hear a story that stretches back to a time before smartphones, before social media, before the world learned to document itself obsessively. They have to make the past feel present without turning it into fiction, because the truth doesn't need embellishment, it needs clarity. The suspect is released pending further action, a move that feels wrong to everyone involved but is dictated by procedure, and he walks out into daylight with a stiffness that suggests he understands something fundamental has changed. The air outside is thicker, heavier, as if the town itself is holding its breath, and for the first time in 20 years, he doesn't blend in the way he used to. Eyes linger. Conversations stop when he passes. The anonymity that once protected him has begun to erode, replaced by a quiet suspicion that doesn't need confirmation to feel real. That night, the town doesn't sleep well. Lights stay on longer. People scroll through old articles, grainy photos, timelines that suddenly feel relevant again. Some feel vindicated, others unsettled, because the idea that the killer was always here, living among them, attending the same events, shopping at the same stores, forces a recalibration of trust that no one enjoys. It's easier to believe monsters come from far away. It's harder to accept they can grow roots. Back at the department, the work continues, relentless and unglamorous. Warrants are drafted. Expert witnesses are contacted. Every loose end is hunted down, because the margin for error is gone now. This isn't just a case, it's a statement, a test of whether persistence can outlast time, whether truth can still surface after being buried under years of assumption and neglect. The investigators move through the night with the quiet determination of people who know they're close enough to feel the heat of the truth even if they can't touch it yet. And somewhere between the hum of fluorescent lights and the glow of computer screens, the cold case sheds its last layer of frost. It isn't solved yet. Not officially. Not on paper. But it's awake now, fully awake, and once something like this wakes up, it doesn't go back to sleep. It demands resolution. It demands accountability. It demands that the past finally be allowed to end, even if ending it means tearing open everything that was built on the lie that it never could. The ending doesn't arrive with sirens or shouting or a single, definitive moment that everyone agrees is the finish line, because endings in cold cases are never clean, never cinematic in the way people imagine when they say they want closure, and the town learns this slowly, over weeks and months, as the final stretch of the story unfolds in courtrooms and conference rooms and quiet kitchens where people sit alone with their thoughts and realize that knowing the truth doesn't erase what the truth destroyed. The case moves forward on paper now, formal and unforgiving, every allegation framed in legal language that feels almost sterile compared to the violence it describes. And yet within those documents is the distilled weight of 20 years, a compressed history of loss, failure, and delayed reckoning. The charges are filed without spectacle, a few paragraphs that hit harder than any headline ever could, because this time the words don't speculate, they assert. And the suspect's name is finally printed alongside the crime in a way that can't be walked back. The announcement ripples through the town like a delayed echo, not explosive but deep, settling into people's chests where it stays, heavy and uncomfortable. Some feel relief so intense it makes them dizzy. Others feel anger sharpen into something almost unbearable, because the cost of waiting has become undeniable, measured in birthdays missed, and parents who died before they could hear the truth, and children who grew up knowing a tragedy but never understanding its shape. In the courtroom, time behaves strangely again, stretching and contracting as the past is reconstructed piece by piece for strangers who were never there, who must now decide what it all means. The prosecution speaks carefully, aware that they are asking a jury to bridge decades with trust, to believe that science can reach backward and pull a moment into the present without distorting it. They explain DNA not as magic but as memory, a biological record that persists even when people lie or forget, and they walk through the evidence slowly, methodically, knowing that the strength of the case lies in its patience. The defense pushes back where it can, questioning procedures, timelines, motives, because doubt is their currency and they spend it freely, but doubt doesn't land the way it used to when faced with data that doesn't argue. That simply exists. The victim's family sits through it all, absorbing details they never wanted to know, details that scrape against their grief in new ways, reopening wounds they thought had scarred over. They hear the night described again, hear the sequence of events mapped out with a clarity that feels cruel, and they realize that understanding doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it just brings specificity, and specificity has edges. But there is also something else in the room now, something that wasn't there before, acknowledgement. Their loss is no longer a mystery to be speculated about, it is a fact to be addressed, a wrong that has finally been named. Outside the courthouse, the town gathers in small, informal clusters, talking in low voices, sharing memories that sound different now that they're anchored to an outcome. Old theories dissolve. Old arguments feel pointless. People confront the uncomfortable truth that they stood next to a killer in line at the grocery store, that they exchanged pleasantries with someone who carried a secret heavy enough to warp an entire community. It forces a kind of collective self-examination, a quiet question that hangs in the air. How well do we really know each other, and how much do we rely on appearances to keep us comfortable? The investigators watch from a distance, their work largely done, and what they feel isn't triumph so much as a complicated mix of exhaustion and restraint. They know this case will be cited, debated, dissected, turned into an example of what persistence can achieve and what delay can destroy. They also know that for every cold case that reaches this point, dozens remain untouched, names still waiting in boxes, evidence still sleeping in lockers. This resolution doesn't close the book on the past, it cracks open a shelf full of similar stories, each one asking for the same attention, the same refusal to let time be an excuse. When the verdict comes, it doesn't land like a thunderclap. It lands like a weight finally set down, heavy but stable, something that has been carried for so long no one remembers what it felt like to stand without it. There are tears, yes, but they are quiet, controlled, the kind that come from release rather than shock. There is no cheering, no sense that anyone has won. The room understands, collectively, that justice isn't victory, it's balance restored too late to undo the damage, but not too late to matter. The sentence follows, measured in years that feel both enormous and inadequate, and the man who once moved invisibly through this town is led away, his anonymity fully stripped, his past no longer something he controls. He looks smaller now, not because of the punishment, but because the lie that sustained him has finally collapsed, and without it there is nothing left to hide behind. The silence that once protected him is gone, replaced by a record that will outlive him, the same way the DNA did. In the days that follow, the town begins the slow work of adjustment. Memorials feel different now. Conversations shift. The case that once defined them as a place haunted by an unsolved crime becomes something else, a reminder that truth can be delayed but not erased, that the past has a way of insisting on being seen. People still lock their doors at night. They still glance over their shoulders sometimes. But there is a subtle change in the air, a loosening of tension that had become so familiar it was almost invisible. And when the story is told again, as it inevitably will be, it won't be framed as a miracle or a triumph of technology alone. It will be told as a warning and a promise intertwined, a reminder that cold cases are not dead, only waiting, that silence is never neutral, and that time, for all its power to bury, also has a way of preserving what matters most. The night in Texas, once frozen and unknowable, finally moves forward, carrying its shadows with it but no longer defined by them, leaving behind a town that knows now, with painful clarity, that the truth may take decades to arrive, but when it does, it changes everything. Even after the verdict, even after the sentence is read and recorded and archived, the story refuses to fully settle, because cold cases don't end the way ordinary cases do, they linger, echoing through places and people that were shaped by their long silence, and the town learns that resolution is not a switch you flip but a slow recalibration of reality. Life resumes on the surface with familiar rhythms, traffic lights cycling, schools opening their doors, neighbors waving across driveways, but underneath it all runs a quiet current of awareness, a shared understanding that something fundamental has shifted, that the past is no longer an open question but a closed wound still tender to the touch. The victim's name is spoken differently now. It's no longer paired with speculation or rumors or the tired phrase, unsolved mystery. It's spoken with certainty, with finality, and that changes the way it feels in the mouth, heavier but steadier, like a truth that can finally support weight. The family returns to routines they never fully abandoned, but there's a subtle difference in how they move through the world, a fraction less guarded, a fraction more present, as if the constant background noise of uncertainty has finally been turned down. Grief doesn't disappear, it never does, but it changes shape, no longer looping endlessly through unanswered questions, now anchored to a reality they can confront, even if confronting it hurts. The town's history books are updated in quiet ways, a paragraph here, a footnote there, acknowledging that for 20 years a chapter remained unfinished. Teachers mention it carefully, aware that some of their students weren't even born when the crime occurred, that for them this is ancient history despite how fresh it still feels to others. Journalists write retrospectives that try to balance restraint with gravity, careful not to sensationalize a tragedy that already took too much. And cold case advocates point to this story as proof that patience and technology can bend time, that answers can still be pulled from the dark if someone is willing to keep looking. Inside the department, the case file is finally closed, stamped and stored with a finality that feels almost ceremonial. The investigators who carried it through its last stretch take a moment, just a moment, to let the weight lift, because this is the rare ending their profession doesn't often provide. They know tomorrow will bring new files, new questions, new frustrations, but this one will stay with them, a reminder of why persistence matters, why failure doesn't have to be permanent, why silence should never be mistaken for peace. They talk about the mistakes made in 2003, not to assign blame, but to learn, to ensure that the next case doesn't have to wait decades to be heard. The man convicted fades from daily conversation faster than anyone expects. His name appears in records and legal documents, but in town it's spoken less and less, not out of denial, but out of a collective refusal to let him define the narrative any longer. Monsters don't deserve immortality. The focus shifts back to the life that was taken, to who the victim was before becoming evidence, before becoming a case number, before becoming a headline. Stories emerge about small kindnesses, about laughter, about plans that were interrupted but not erased, because memory, unlike fear, can be reshaped into something that honors rather than haunts. At night, the streets feel quieter, not because danger is gone, but because the unspoken tension has eased. People still remember. They always will. But memory now carries context, and context dulls the sharpest edges of fear. The town understands, in a way it didn't before, that justice doesn't rewrite history, it reframes it, turning chaos into sequence, mystery into narrative. That understanding doesn't make the world safer, but it makes it more honest. And somewhere in the collective consciousness, the phrase cold case takes on a new meaning. It's no longer synonymous with hopelessness or abandonment. It becomes a reminder that time is not an alibi, that evidence has a longer memory than people, that truth can be delayed but not erased. The night in Texas, once suspended in uncertainty, now exists as a completed chapter, still dark, still painful, but finally defined. The story ends not with silence, but with a steady, grounding presence, the knowledge that even after decades, even after mistakes and missed chances, accountability can arrive. The cold case that haunted a town for 20 years no longer whispers from the shadows. It stands in the light, fully seen, its echoes fading not because they're forgotten, but because they've finally been answered.